Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Cougar, the Bitch, and the Wardrobe. I'm your host, Lana Mazer, also known as Curated by the Cougar. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. And if you've already been listening and subscribing, thank you. Your support means the world to me. Today's episode is reframing the unexpected or finding meaning in the detour. And it's funny because when I was first thinking about this topic and was trying to come up with a title, the first title that I came up with was Flipping the Script on Regret. And I really had to rework that because personally speaking, I don't have any regrets. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I feel very happy that I can say that about my life. It doesn't mean that I might have foreseen things going in another direction and having been disappointed in certain things going that way in the past. But that being said, I don't live with any regret. And I really spent a lot of time reflecting and soul searching on that. And I wanted to spend some time really digging into this topic because I especially feel that as we enter into midlife, we do look back and sometimes say to ourselves, oh, I really wish that I didn't do that, or I really would have preferred that I had taken a different path or made a different choice or whatever. And so I want us to spend some time talking about that perhaps there is another way of reframing all of this. And regardless of what your beliefs are in terms of being religious or not religious, I always think to myself, the universe has a plan. And we sometimes, at least for me, for myself, when I try to control things, because that is my type A personality, sometimes I really have to say to myself, the universe has a plan. I'm going to leave it up to the universe. And in some ways, that has relieved some of that pressure. And actually, there's a saying that my father loves to say this one. This is one of his favorite quotes is that man plans and God laughs. And so I do like that one also, just saying that sometimes it's things are truly out of our control and we have to do our best with what is thrown our way and really how we reframe things and how we're going to move forward. So I do think that regrets often surface in midlife because we're looking back on decades of choices. So when I was in my 20s, if I looked back, I only had a couple of decades of life behind me and 30s, 40s, now approaching 50. I'm confronted with decades of experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So it does give us more material to reflect on and work with. And I do think that we're confronted with, well, what would my life look like if I had done X? What would my life look like if I had decided to marry that person instead of the one that I ended up with? And so a lot of these things come up as we get older. Now, I'm not saying that if you're in your 20s, 30s, and your 40s, that's not going to happen for you. It obviously will, but it's just that approaching 50, someone who's approaching 60s, 70s, 80s, they have many more decades of experiences to reflect on. And I want today that we're not going to dwell on the what ifs, but rather we're flipping them into action. So I do think that there is the nature of regret, specifically here talking about women. Most of my listeners are women, but again, men have a lot of the same similar feelings, maybe missed career changes, staying too long in relationships, not traveling when that trip was a possibility. And then also maybe you have regrets with putting others before yourself. And I do think that societal roles shape these regrets and how we're taught to prioritize. I do think that as women, we are taught by society to prioritize everyone else except for ourselves. And I think also just sheer biology, we are, if you do have a child, for a woman, that is something that we are just naturally, we carry a baby for 9 months, we give birth, we nurture, we watch our children grow, and so we are going to put our children ahead of ourselves, just naturally speaking. And I think that getting to a point now, even speaking for myself, now my children are still young, they're not adults yet, they're approaching 11 and 13. And as they do get older and they are able to do things more independently, it has created the space for me to think more about things that I want to do for myself and how I want to prioritize myself. Clearly, when they were younger, and I'm speaking to newer moms out there, it's very hard to do that because you have this helpless infant that literally needs you every second of the day in order to survive. But I do think that now that I'm in this space in the in between, so they're no longer babies, but they're not adults yet, I can say to the younger moms, because I've had that decade of experience of my kids now being 10 and 12, that that is a short-lived time frame that you really can't prioritize yourself at all. That time does come to an end. And now I'm moving into this next chapter of my life as my kids get older and are in middle school and then high school. And then I see some friends of mine, family members whose children are older, and they're moving into that chapter of their life, and they can reflect and give me their experiences and what they are now looking towards, that they might be empty nesters. So I think in this situation, if you are a parent and you might be in a place right now where you can't really entertain going on a big trip, or you really can't entertain a career change because you just don't have the time, the bandwidth to invest in yourself or in that process right now. What I want to say is that those regrets that might creep into your mind, or if you're saying to yourself, well, it's too late. Again, that's what I mean by let's find meaning in the detour. That this is just a detour right now, or not even a detour. It might just be the path that your life is on right now. And that really can change in the near future. And a lot of these things are really based on different familial situations, where you are in your career. And I do think that even talking about career, I have gone through so many different phases for myself in terms of what I anticipated for myself career wise since I graduated college. So now that I will be 49 in May, and how old are we when we graduate college? 22. So if I'm doing my math correctly, so that's been 27 years. Yeah. um, I really think about all the different detours that have occurred along the way for myself, and at the time was very frustrating. And I didn't really understand why things were going that way. I was very upset with myself or upset with the situation. And now looking back on those decades, I now have a clearer understanding of why and those things needed to happen in order for me to find my purpose. And without sounding really woo woo, because I know that some people are not so into that, I do think that there is a plan, as I said, for each of us that is a bit out of our control. And again, maybe I like to think in that way because it does alleviate some of the stress that I put on myself, or being really hard on myself and the expectations that I put on myself. But going back to when I graduated college, I graduated in 1999 from the University of Michigan, and I applied to law school and I got in. And I went to law school for a semester and I hated it. It was not for me at all. And I don't really think at the time I could have really put my finger on why. It just didn't feel like the right fit for me. And that was again in that at that point in my life felt very disappointing because I felt, especially in that generation, like my generation in that time, I felt like everybody had this very clear plan of what they were going to do. So people knew they either wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, they wanted to work in finance. This was also, I mean, now, I mean, well, I already dated myself by saying when I graduated college, but this was also the very beginning of the .com era. So a lot of people went to work for these startups. And I felt that everybody had so much direction, and I really didn't. And I did work in different jobs. I can't even call them careers because they were very short lived positions. I did learn a lot about myself along the way, even though at the time I was less aware. And then moving forward from there, I eventually decided that I wanted to get a master's in nutrition. And going through the process of looking into different programs, I found one at Columbia that wasn't just in nutrition, but it was a dual master's in nutrition and exercise physiology. And I felt really excited about this. I was really inspired because in my own journey, I've always been interested in nutrition and fitness. So I figured, yes, this is going to be perfect for me. And what happened is that in many ways it was, now that I've come full circle, but at the time I did really enjoy the process of getting my master's. It was an unbelievable program. I met so many interesting people. My professors were incredible. And I ended up doing quite well. And for me, getting good grades was something that I was able to always achieve. I did work really hard to get good grades, but I think when I graduated Columbia, I graduated close to a 4.0. But what happened is that during that process of getting my master's, I also wanted to become a registered dietitian. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, you go through a process. You have to do an internship, which I completed, and then you have to sit for a standardized exam. Standardized exams have never been my forte. I've always really struggled with them. And even going back when I had to study for the SATs and the LSATs, and then for my program, I also had to take the GREs. It was always a struggle. And I was always able to do well enough to check that box to get in. What really helped me always was the fact that I was an excellent student. But now it came time for me to sit for this standardized exam to become a registered dietitian. And I failed that exam. And not only did I fail it once, but I failed it 3 times. And eventually I needed to make a decision for myself as to what was I going to do? Was I going to continue trying to pass this exam, or was I just going to move on? So I ultimately decided to move on. I was able to work for myself in like a private practice setting. But if I ever wanted to get a job in a hospital or at a school as a registered dietitian, I couldn't. And then also, when people asked me, well, how come you're not an RD? I then had to explain to them why. And so this was something that really ate away at me for many years and was very, very disappointing. And now looking back, I sometimes think to myself, well, what would have happened if I had passed? What would my life look like now? Would that have been my calling to work in a hospital or to work in a school? I don't think so. And ultimately, what happened is that I did open my own practice. I did that for a number of years until I moved to Montclair and then was really now starting over again. I had very young kids and was looking to create a life for myself here in Montclair. So for a long time, I did wonder if that had been a waste of time, had getting my master's and working so hard to achieve that and studying and the time, the financial investment and all of it, even though I did learn so much. But ultimately, I moved away from that as my career long term. And I tried a lot of different things. And a lot of times, those things blew up in my face. And I really had to say to myself, okay, am I going to wallow in this and feel like this is a defeat, or am I feeling defeated, or am I going to find meaning in the detour? And from that point going forward, I did try different things that did not work out. One of the greatest disappointments for me when I was living in Montclair was the fact that I had a gallery here in Montclair with 3 other women. One of the women had to move. She was going through a divorce and ended up moving out of state. And ultimately, the business failed because one of the women who I partnered with for the gallery, and I've spoken about this before, ended up stealing money from the business. And I then had to go through the process of suing her for the money and eventually getting some of it back. But it was traumatizing for me. I was really hurt. I was very disappointed. I felt really taken advantage of. It was a violation. And this was someone who I really considered to be a friend. And again, in those moments, was I regretful for having gone into business? Or was that just now I had to find meaning in the detour? And I think about that quite often because if that hadn't have happened, I don't know where that would have set me going forward. And I guess, we'll never know. But what's interesting is that from there, I did try a stab in the real estate market. And that was, again, did not work out the way that I had wanted to. It had turned out to be a small financial loss, and that was disappointing. But again, that occurrence then pushed me more into what I'm doing now. And I feel very from deep inside my soul that I have found my calling. And yes, it took me until 49 years old to be able to say that, but I feel so lucky that I'm here. So I do believe that midlife is the perfect time to flip the script, to find meaning in the detour. I've talked about this in previous episodes, but self awareness really peaks now. There's less concern with pleasing others and more about doing things that please ourselves and what brings us joy, what brings us fulfillment, being more true to who we are. Our priorities shift. It's not about necessarily starting from scratch, but making bolder, more intentional choices. And I think that that really carries into all different aspects, whether it's career, or in relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship. It's really about being intentional about what we want for ourselves and who we surround ourselves with. I think that there are practical strategies to, again, to reframe the unexpected or to find meaning in the detour. I think that it's taking a moment for yourselves, for ourselves, to take potentially what you consider might be a regret and ask yourself, what did it teach me? What strength came from it? And that also might be a question. And I've had this conversation with friends that are going through a divorce or are divorced. And I've asked myself the same questions about um, did I about did I make the wrong choice for myself with who I chose to marry? What would my life look like? What would it look like if it were any different? And the truth is, again, we'll never know, but instead of taking that moment or that choice as a regret, but it's just a moment in time, a partner that you spent time with that was part of your journey. And I feel very strongly about that when I think about both of my ex husbands. It was a moment in time. My second marriage was did last longer than my first marriage, but I don't have regrets from either marriage. And quite honestly, I feel again that, you know, thankful that I had those experiences and especially thankful to my second husband because together we created our two beautiful children. And if that had not happened, I I guess I will never know. But I don't feel that regret. Again, it was a moment in time and finding meaning in those moments instead of beating ourselves up for why did we make those decisions at that time. And I also think that there is an approach where you don't have to overhaul your life. You can do it small. Take one small action that mirrors that old dream. So again, what I mean by that is like thinking about what brought you to making that choice and reframing it to move forward and making a different one to push you forward. I also think that in terms of myself, again, finding things anew or finding things that might bring another level of interest or excitement to my life has also helped me reframe where I'm going forward. And for example, for me, it's really now as in the past I was focused on my personal fitness, but again now because I have more time and more flexibility to do so, I've been able to really focus on that. And what's crazy for me is that if you had asked me 5 years ago or even a year ago would I ever participate in athletic competition, I would have told you that you were insane. And just this Tuesday, I registered to participate in High Rocks, which I will be speaking a lot about over the next few months as I'm training for it and preparing for it, on which will take place on May 31st. But again, like, that's something that I never thought would be possible. And also in terms of finding a new meaning for myself now that I'm divorced. And again, that was the end of a life that I saw for myself. Because, of course, I didn't get married thinking I was going to get divorced, especially I didn't think I was going to get married twice and divorced twice. But again, finding the meaning in that detour, or reframing the unexpected. And so when my children are away for the summer and they do go to sleepaway camp, I have found a lot of joy and pleasure in creating friendships with women that also are in situations that have the ability during the summer to travel. And we do that together. And that has been really amazing. And I remember that when my marriage ultimately came to an end and my ex moved out, that was something that I was really questioning. Like, what is that time alone going to look like? But I have really found so many new things that I never thought were a possibility for me. As I mentioned, training for High Rocks, travel. I'm on the board for 2 museums, one here in Montclair and one in New York. I was always interested in theater, but I always went with my ex-husband, or I went with a friend. Now I'll go see a Broadway show by myself. I'll go to a museum by myself. I'll go to a gallery by myself. I've really been able to reframe this new journey in a way for more self-exploration, for me to really understand myself and find the things that I'm passionate about. I do want to encourage my listeners to take your what ifs and create a new chapter. And also take those moments, these small wins, as your hell yes moments, and really celebrate those small wins, because change can be hard and the unexpected can be difficult to manage. So even if it's a tiny win, it's still worth celebrating. I want to also say that regrets don't define us. Again, it's about reframing the unexpected, finding meaning in the detour. Those moments, those experiences can really fuel our next moves. And I think that really, again, works so well into what this year is going to look like. This is the year of the horse. So we're looking at forward movement, not looking back, forward movement. What is this year going to bring for us? The excitement of that. And I really think that that's a great way to reframe your thoughts. I want to thank everyone so much for tuning in today. If you have any comments, feedback, please message me on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube at Curated by the Cougar. You can find the podcast on Spotify and also on Apple Music at The Cougar, the Bitch, and the Wardrobe. Thank you so much. Until next time.